everybody, and welcome back to another video from Julia Speed Builds. I am Julia, and today we are just building a simple base game starter home. This lot is in Willow Creek, and we are working with a budget of about $18,000. I believe the lot was a little less expensive than normal because it is a 20 by 15, I believe, as opposed to like a 20 by 30. I know that there is actually like an actual starter home challenge on, I believe, like Reddit. It's just like a building challenge, and it's got specific rules of what constitutes being a starter home, but I think at its essence, a starter home is just something that you can immediately download and start your game in. So what I did was I randomized a sim from the gallery and dropped her down into this world, picked out this lot in Willow Creek, and at that point we had about $18,000 left, and we just built to our heart's content. I made sure everything in this was base game, because what's the point in making a starter home if not everyone can actually start their game in it? The game, if you do download things from the gallery and you don't have items from a specific pack in there, it is pretty good about kind of auto-populating something new for you, but it is not perfect. So I like to try to keep the inclusion there, if you know what I mean. And yeah, so let's get into the build. I wanted it to be built specifically just for a single sim. I do end up giving her a double bed, but you know, who knows what happens, maybe she'll get married in her playthrough. But I gave it this nice wraparound porch because I was trying to give it a little bit of a homier, countryer feel to it, kind of to fit in with the houses around it, but to be a little bit more, I don't know, just cutesy. I think some of the EA builds are a little bit, what's the word for just immobile, or it's static maybe. They're just kind of stiff. So we tried to work against that, but also make the house fit into the neighborhood. I ended up choosing a red roof because I actually just found this red like tin swatch, and it reminded me of the house I grew up in. I grew up on a farm, and we had a white house with a red tin roof, and so I had already colored the house white, but just because it was simple, it was one of the cheaper paints for the outside of a house, and then I found the color swatch for those like tin sheets, and I was like, oh wait, the nostalgia is kind of taking over, so I went with a red roof. I also think it was just kind of a unique choice that I liked a lot, so I'm very glad to have picked a red roof. It kind of makes the house pop in a certain way. This is also the reason why I picked the windows with shutters, because I think they're a little more country and home style, if you will. And then we started on our floor plan. It was more challenging than I thought it would be at first to get this floor plan thought out. We had like a nice open space, but because it was so open, it was hard for me to fit in the like actual structured rooms, especially because normally I like to put the bathroom attached to the bedroom. I just think that that's a convenience thing that you want in real life, and so I try to replicate that in sim life. So once I kind of broke that down in my mind, I was fine creating this floor plan. We actually have a nice open floor plan where you can see the kitchen and living room and dining room all in the same space, but it's not just kind of like an awkward square. It is a nice little zigzagging hallway almost. So I really liked that. We also had a pretty spacious bedroom and bathroom, so I'm not even mad about it. We picked some pretty basic counters. That's always the problem when doing these starter homes, is you are on a budget and you are still trying to make a house that you'd want to live in. I think that's one of the more depressing things about moving into some of the EA curated houses, is they're super empty because they also want you to be able to play in them for your first go around. They have to be starter homes by default and by purpose. And so the challenge for like builders in the community is always, how do you make it feel more decorated and lived in, but remain to the same budget restrictions. And I think the solution to that ultimately is just making smaller builds and choosing some of the less expensive, bigger furniture options. I think people normally don't want to do that just because sometimes they can be the uglier options. But I think when you play around with color swatches and things, you can really maximize some of those cheaper options to their fullest potential. I mean, otherwise, too, the reason you wouldn't want to pick them is because appliances can break and things, and so that's annoying when you're actually playing, but that's the whole point of doing like a playthrough, is to be able to upgrade those things and like earn them. Those are kind of like your achievements in a simulation, so I think it's totally fine to start out with lesser appliances, especially when you can make them cute. Our color palette in here ended up being white and dark wood and blue, and honestly, those are some of my favorite colors, so I probably picked those subconsciously, but I think they were all based around those cabinets that I picked out first, because I didn't want to go all white because that was pretty plain, and then I didn't want to pick out the ones with the dark wood on the side just because the orange countertops would have been hard to match things to. So we picked blue and then kind of based everything else around that. For that living room, I think that configuration was one of the more difficult things to figure out spacing-wise, because I didn't know like where to put the couch versus the back door versus the television. One of the big splurges in this build is the television. Normally you kind of go with like the basic box TV, but I was able to put one of the bigger flat screen TVs in there, and then also have some paintings available at the end. Yeah, so we fixed a lot of the spacing of the windows throughout this build. I was trying to be conservative with the windows because they are pretty expensive and an expense you wouldn't normally think about when you're just kind of like pasting them on rapidly and to excess. When you're doing your shells. So here I am again doing this living room. I could not figure out a configuration. I have a bad habit of trying to make things diagonal. I think that's an easy way to make things feel like they have movement in a configuration, so I always try to stay away from just pushing things against walls. But in this case, this is what I ultimately went with the two couches in an L shape around the television. That ended up being the most inviting looking space, and one of the more cheaper configurations of that space as well, because it was two smaller couches instead of bigger couches. We're about to flip this bedroom around backwards and put up a mirror. Oh, I guess we aren't flipping the bedroom now. But every time I think I'm done figuring out the functionality of a space, I realize how incredibly wrong I am, and I keep fiddling with it to make it better. I think we rearranged that bathroom 3 or 4 times by the end of this. And I did have to straighten up this front porch. I just realized it wasn't working with the windows, and we needed more lighting in that front hallway. So I ended up making the stairs 1 block smaller, and making the door 1 block smaller because it was a 2 wide door, and a 1 wide door made these windows fit more appropriately. Here we go. Oh, actually, it's the wrong way. I said that the opposite way. We had a 1 wide door, and by making it a 2 wide door, we were able to make the front symmetrical. That also ended up being a cheaper door somehow, so I was glad to have found that. I had forgotten to put a hood over the oven earlier, so we add one of those. And then we were actually able to put curtains on all these windows. I didn't think we were going to be able to just because of budget restraints. And we were able to. Also, somehow these were all the windows that had curtains that actually snapped to them appropriately. I feel like it's so hard to use curtains in this game. They never quite fit. I think you have to really use the curtains that go with the windows in whatever pack that they came with. It's definitely like the curtains were made for the windows that they were made with. Am I saying that correctly? Like, if you buy, like, the Get Famous pack, the windows that come in that pack, the only curtains that work for those windows are the curtains in the Get Famous pack, for example. But yeah, we're just doing some final detailing at this point. I had been trying to save money for this process from the beginning. I turned on debug and live edit objects. And that's what we end up doing all the plants with. But I ended up not really using many of the debug objects because a lot of them cost money, and I wasn't expecting that. Like, I put up a postcard and a bulletin board at one point, and it was like -50, -50, and I went, whoa, wait, what? I thought this was a debug object. So I had to get rid of those. But I think the rugs really made this house feel like a home, and made this space feel filled. So I definitely would recommend finding some of the cheaper and smaller rugs in the game and sizing them up and down accordingly to fit your space. It will drastically improve the quality of your builds, or just the hominess of your builds. I believe we still have one more reconfiguration of that bathroom to go before it's finally done. So here are some of the debug trees, but they weren't quite big enough for me, so we do go back and pick another one. We used terrain paint on the lot as opposed to a lot of plants because it is free and it adds a lot of ambiance as well. So there's that bigger tree, and it actually ended up being the tree that the rest of the neighborhood uses, I guess, or EA used for the rest of the neighborhood. That's why it was a debug object. So I was really excited to find that because it just fits in really well with everything around it. I tried to fiddle around with plants outside, but then I figured out that less was more and just added these larger bushes to the front and then painted around the side of the house to give it a little bit of texture. And then we'll go back and add some daisies to the front as well. And it was interesting to see how there's the purchasable version of those like rows of bushes, and then there's the debug version of the bushes, and they were pretty much exactly the same. Maybe their coloring was a little bit different, but I just thought that was really interesting. But we're about to put down our final tree, and do our final little adjustments. We're going to decorate the kitchen. I thought that mailbox was perfect for this house too. So we do end this build with a little bit of money left over that is playable so that your character can still eat meals. And thank you all for watching this video today. I will see y'all next time, and don't forget to like and subscribe and find this build in the gallery.